Today on The Secret Case, we'll talk about one of the most feared criminals of the 1970s in the United States, David Berkowitz, known as the Son of Sam. This man spread fear in the streets of New York for more than a year, attacking people at random and unleashing one of the largest police hunts in the history of the city. In this video, we'll review his childhood, the beginning of his criminal activity, how he was captured, and the impact of his actions on New York society. Before we begin, I invite you to subscribe to El Caso Secreto to learn more about criminal stories and sinister figures who left a mark on history. Press the bell to not miss any of our videos. David Richard Berkowitz was born on June 1, 1953 in Brooklyn, New York. He was adopted a few days after birth by a Jewish couple, Nathan and Pearl Berkowitz. Throughout his childhood, David was described by those who knew him as a lonely child, with few friends and an almost non-existent social life. Although he was raised in a relatively stable environment, Berkowitz soon began to display problematic behavior. From an early age, he showed signs of emotional instability and had difficulty controlling his violent impulses. During his childhood, he was often teased because of his overweight and physical appearance, which contributed to his increasing social isolation. His adoptive mother, Pearl, was the central figure in his life, and when she passed away from breast cancer when David was 14, his world fell apart. This event left a deep mark on him and is considered one of the factors that influenced his behavior in later years. Following the death of his mother, his relationship with his adoptive father deteriorated rapidly. Nathan remarried and moved to Florida, leaving David alone in New York. These feelings of abandonment and loneliness continued to fuel his emotional instability. In an attempt to find direction, Berkowitz joined the army at 18, where he served for 3 years. However, upon returning, he failed to adjust to civilian life and continued to fall into a deep emotional abyss. In the summer of 1976, he began a series of attacks that would terrorize New Yorkers and put the authorities in jeopardy. On July 29, 1976, Berkowitz committed his first known attack. That night, in the Pelham Bay neighborhood of the Bronx, 2 young men were attacked while sitting in their car. The young woman was killed instantly, and her passenger was seriously injured. This was just the beginning of a series of attacks that would continue over the next year. Berkowitz had no clear pattern when choosing his victims. His targets were mostly young couples who were in parked cars or in public areas. His modus operandi was to approach the cars and, without warning, shoot the victims. This style of attack, seemingly random and without apparent motive, created mass panic among the city's residents. Couples began to avoid parking in dark areas, and fear quickly spread. The most disturbing thing about Berkowitz's case was that after several attacks, he began leaving letters addressed to the police and the media, signed as the Son of Sam. In these letters, Berkowitz described himself as an instrument of dark forces that forced him to act. This detail made the case take an even more sinister turn, as they were not only dealing with a criminal, but someone who seemed to enjoy the psychological game he was playing. As the months passed, Berkowitz's attacks became more frequent. New Yorkers' fear grew to unprecedented levels. Authorities, under pressure to solve the case, began an intense investigation. The New York police dedicated hundreds of officers to the search for the killer, but for months, they failed to make significant progress. Berkowitz's letters to the media played a key role in increasing mass panic. In them, he referred to a supposed demon called Sam, who he claimed controlled him and forced him to act violently. These letters, written in a chaotic manner and filled with disturbing symbols and phrases, were published in newspapers, intensifying anxiety in the city. Each new letter or attack generated national headlines, and the Son of Sam case became a media obsession. By this point, the police were desperate for any clue that would lead them to the perpetrator. The hot summer days of 1977 saw New York paralyzed by fear. Many people changed their daily routines for fear of being the next target of the Son of Sam. Young couples, in particular, suffered the most from the anguish, as most of Berkowitz's victims had been attacked in cars or in secluded locations. As difficult as the investigation was, it was a small mistake that would ultimately lead to Berkowitz's capture. On July 31, 1977, the Son of Sam's final attack took place. That night, a young couple was attacked in Brooklyn, and although both survived, the authorities were now closer to solving the case. The clue to his arrest came from a witness who observed a man acting suspiciously near a car on the night of the latest attack. The witness wrote down the license plate number of the vehicle and turned it over to police. This simple observation led investigators to a name, David Berkowitz. When police investigated further, they discovered that Berkowitz had received a ticket for illegal parking near the scene of one of the attacks, linking him directly to the crime. On August 10, 1977, police descended on Berkowitz's apartment in Yonkers. When they arrested him, he almost immediately confessed to being the son of Sam. A firearm was found in his car, and more evidence connecting him to the attacks was found in his home. Berkowitz was described by officers as calm and cooperative at the time of his capture, which surprised many given the fear he had generated. Berkowitz's trial was one of the most publicized in New York history. Despite his attempts to claim that demonic voices had forced him to commit the crimes, he was declared mentally competent to stand trial. In 1978, Berkowitz pleaded guilty to 6 counts of murder and was sentenced to 6 consecutive life terms without the possibility of parole. During his trial, Berkowitz showed little remorse, something that shocked both the families of his victims and the general public. However, in the years that followed, his behavior changed dramatically. In prison, he claimed to have found religion and converted to Christianity. Since then, he has expressed remorse for his actions and has repeatedly apologized to the families of his victims, although many doubt the sincerity of his words. Today, David Berkowitz remains in prison, where he has spent more than 40 years. Although his days of terror on the streets of New York are long gone, his name remains synonymous with fear and chaos in the minds of those who lived through that era. The story of David Berkowitz, the son of Sam, is one of the most shocking in American criminal history. His attacks not only left an indelible mark on the victims and their families, but also changed the way New York City viewed security and crime. His ability to generate so much fear in such a large city and his strange behavior after the crimes make him a figure of fear.